What's up guys, welcome back. Base coating is something that is usually forgotten about in miniature painting tutorials. It seems like such a simple step that most people just skip over explaining it. But if you get it wrong, and let's be honest, most people get it wrong, every other part of your paint job is going to suffer. And if you get it really wrong, your miniature is going to end up looking like a prop from Goldilocks and the Three Bears. The ideal base coat should be smooth with an even coverage and an even finish. When you're doing base coats, the first thing you want to get right is your paint consistency. Most likely you're using a consistency that is way too thick. Thick paint doesn't flow off the brush, can obscure details, tends to leave visible brush strokes, and if applied with variable thickness, won't dry with an even finish. What you're looking for is paint that has a consistency which is slightly thicker than milk. And you get this by simply adding water to your paint. How much water you need to add is going to depend on how much paint you have on your palette. If you're not using a palette, start using one today. If you don't already know how, check out my video on setting up your own wet palette. That will tell you everything that you need to know. The amount of water you require also depends on what kind of paint you're using. For example, Games Workshop paint will require less water than scale colour, but more water than something like P3 or Fantasy and Games. Now, when you thin the paint, what you're trying to achieve is to get it to consistency such that it flows smoothly off the brush, much like this. Notice the way that the paint slowly comes together after you draw the brush through it. That's what you're looking for. If speed is a factor, you can use a slightly thicker consistency, but it requires more careful application, so I'd suggest erring on the side of caution and going for this more thinner consistency. I recommend you experiment for a while applying your paint onto something like a plate just to test out the consistency. If the paint doesn't flow off the brush, then it's too thick, so you're going to have to add a little more water to it. And at the other end of the spectrum, if the paint does flow off, but it doesn't slowly come together when you draw your brush through it, kind of like this, then it's too thin, so you'll need to add a bit more paint. Once you find that ideal balance between paint and water a couple of times, you'll start to get a sense of how the paint feels and the way it behaves on the palette. And that means it's going to take you way less time to find that correct consistency in the future. So once you get the right consistency, you then need to actually apply it to the model. I'm going to start off with quite a desaturated red tone. This one I have here is scale colour red leather, and all I do is add my water to the paint, thinning it down to that nice base consistency. As I said earlier, you're going to need more water when you're using scale colour than with other brands, so if you're using this specific paint, just try to keep that in mind. We're going to paint that onto the model over a few layers until we get a nice even coverage. If you've never used scale colour before, you'll notice when you're painting it onto the model, it's going to look like it has great coverage and the colour will be actually quite saturated. But as it dries, it's going to reduce in its intensity quite dramatically, and also as you can see here, the coverage won't be as solid as you initially thought. So you will need to do a couple more layers to get a solid base coat. And just a quick note on applying base coats. As you block in the colours, you want to follow the wet edge of the paint. So what do I mean by that?
I've no idea, but I'm sure you're going to tell us.
Angus, I was right in the middle of a flow there, God's sake.
A flow? Don't give me that. It's all scripted, this. I saw you typing out the other day there.
What? I mean, yeah, but that wasn't for this, so that was for something else.
Something else? Like what? You're writing your memoirs, aye? A wee 300-page curriculum vitae, perhaps? Who do you think you are? Banshee? Oh yeah.
Look, just beat it. I'm trying to explain this whole wet edge thing.
Pfft, wet edge. More like wet arse. Paint with a wet edge, he says. You get more sense out of broken kludgy.
Yeah, well, no one asked you, so go away back to your sheep or something. Anyway, as I was saying, when you paint on your initial brush stroke, you're going to create two edges, one on either side of the paint, and these are your wet edges. So your next brush stroke that you apply should be along one of those edges, and you're always going to place the brush onto the model at the edge of your wet paint, never back into the central area. The reason being that your paint is more likely to have started drying in that middle section, simply because the paint has been on there for longer. If you put your paint into an area where the paint has begun drying, you're going to tear it and create a visible surface texture. So if you want a smoother finish on your base coats, always try and paint with the wet edge, never against it. One last thing I want to mention about base coats is that the coverage you get with colours across a specific brand is actually going to vary quite a lot. And that's because colours have different strengths. Yellow being the weakest, all the way through to blue, which is going to be the strongest. So you're going to struggle in getting a solid opaque layer with yellow through to red. And then as you get to your purples, greens and blues, you're going to have a much easier time. So you might find that you can get a solid opaque blue in only a couple of coats, but be doing 6 or more layers to get the same level of coverage with your yellows. Alright guys, so hopefully that gives you a more solid understanding of base coating. Let me know what you thought of the video in the comments below. Don't forget to smash like and share the video, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks again. Bye for now.